Welcome back to Goosebump on the Midnight series, where the most terrifying haunted stories are told. Today, we'll listen to a new story called Echoes from Serpent's Creek. Let's listen together and guess where the story will lead and how it will end on tonight's Horror Stories channel. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for your support. Quinn killed the engine of his old Honda scooter, its rough cough swallowed by the city's chaotic symphony. He pulled off his professional-grade monitoring headphones, an expensive piece of equipment that looked out of place with its owner's dusty appearance, and the real world rushed in. The chugging of motorboats from the nearby canal, the shrill cries of lottery ticket vendors, the soulless thumping of electronic music from a roadside cafe, it all merged into a chaotic mess, a meaningless and exhausting wall of sound. He hated it. He hated this artificial, industrial noise. It was like a thick layer of grime, smothering the true sounds of life, the primal rhythms of the world he had spent his life hunting. He instinctively adjusted the Zoom H6 audio recorder strapped to his chest, a habit now ingrained in him. His eyes darted across the small screen, checking the battery level and the remaining space on the memory card. Everything was ready, just like him, always prepared to hit the road. For 3 weeks, he had been a nomad wandering through the riverlands. His luggage wasn't clothes or personal items, but microphones, cables, and a heart filled with an unceasing hunger. He had recorded the mournful late-night call of the noodle soup vendor in Port Cadence, the clacking sound of 2 bamboo sticks that had become a part of countless generations' memories. He had captured the sorrowful melodies of traditional folk music beside the Serpent River, notes that seemed squeezed from the very soul of the artist, blending with the long sighs of the water. He had also caught the sound of the wind whistling through the vast coconut groves in Bentray County, a sound both wild and peaceful. His collection, titled Primal Sounds, was growing, high-quality audio files meticulously organized on his hard drive. But the ache in his chest, an invisible void, had not subsided. It was like a chronic hunger that could never be satisfied, a wound no medicine could heal. Not since that fateful day, the day Maya died. Maya. His little sister. Just thinking her name brought a dull, coiling pain to Quinn's heart. She had been born into a world of complete silence. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but a deficiency, a confinement. Her delicate ears could not perceive the beautiful melodies he cherished, couldn't hear their mother's sweet lullabies each night, couldn't know the clear song of birds at dawn. Her world was a silent film that never ended. With a persistence that bordered on obsession, Quinn had spent his youth trying to describe sound to his sister. He would press her ear to his chest so she could feel the vibrations as he sang. He used clumsy drawings, curves, and straight lines to paint a piece of music. He used all the love a brother could muster, trying to break down the wall of silence that surrounded her. That obsession shaped his entire life. He threw himself into the study of acoustics, becoming a sound engineer, a researcher of folk audio, all for a single purpose. He wanted to capture the soul of the world, the very essence of sound, and one day, by some miracle, allow his sister to hear it. He wanted to create a symphony that could be felt with the soul, not just the eardrums. But she was gone before he could fulfill his mission. A high fever, a seizure, and his world collapsed. She departed in silence, just as she had lived. This project, this journey, was both a job and a pilgrimage of penance. With every sound he captured, he wondered if Maya could feel it. In every land he passed through, he saw her image in the silent children by the roadside. Quinn sighed, opening his old laptop. The screen's light illuminated his sorrowful face. He scrolled to an email from Professor Arden, a respected historian he'd met at a conference. It was the professor who had breathed new life into a journey that had seemed to hit a dead end. He knew about Quinn's obsession and seemed to empathize with it. "You should have a listen to this, Quinn," the professor wrote. It was recorded near the Blackwood Melaleuca Forest in Ashford Province. One of my students accidentally captured it on his phone during a field trip. The quality is very poor, but I think you'll be interested. The locals call it the Banshee's Wail, or something similar. They say it only appears on nights with a crescent moon, echoing from an abandoned shrine deep in the forest. It might just be the wind howling through rock crevices, or some nocturnal bird not yet identified by science. But with your particular sensitivity, who knows, you might find something fascinating. An audio file was attached. Quinn plugged in his monitoring headphones, isolating himself from the noisy world outside, and pressed play. The recording began with the chirping of insects, characteristic of the rural night. Crickets, frogs, a familiar chorus. Then, the rustling of wind through the Melaleuca leaves. But then, weaving through these natural sounds, was something else. Something that didn't belong to this world. It wasn't quite a melody, nor was it the howl of an animal. It was a long, mournful series of notes, rising and falling, like a violin played by an artist in the throes of utter madness. The sound was thin, faint, yet it had a strange, piercing quality. It didn't enter the ears but seemed to burrow straight into the chest, planting a seed of indescribable unease in the listener's heart. It followed none of the musical rules Quinn had ever learned, yet it had its own rhythm, a rhythm of sorrow, of absolute despair. Quinn closed his eyes, nudged the volume up, and tried to use his experience to filter out the noise. And then he heard it. In the deepest layer of that sound, hidden behind the mournful wail, was a choked sob, almost imperceptible. The sob of a child. Quinn's heart skipped a beat, then began to pound. This was it. This wasn't the wind, nor was it a bird. This was the sound he had been searching for. A primal, pure sound, untouched by civilization, that carried a story within it. A tragic story. The soul of a place, the pain of a life, condensed into sound. He snapped the laptop shut, a decision made instantly, without hesitation. Next destination, the Blackwood Melaleuca Forest, Ashford Province. 2 days later, Quinn was in the town of Riverside, the gateway to the Blackwood Forest Ecological Reserve. The air here was completely different from Crestfall City. The sun was intense but not oppressive, tempered by cool breezes carrying the scent of moisture and the raw smell of earth, of the forest, of wildlife. Quinn found a small, clean motel to drop his things. The room was simple, with just a bed, a ceiling fan, and a window overlooking a red dirt road. But for Quinn, it was enough. His first task wasn't to rest, but to find a guide. He knew he couldn't venture alone into a forest as vast and complex as Blackwood, especially when his target was a place not on any tourist map, a place people only mentioned in fearful whispers. The motel owner, a stout, good-natured middle-aged man named Mr. Hale, scratched his head after hearing Quinn's strange request. "You want to go to the abandoned shrine deep in the forest? What on earth for? People say that place is crawling with ghosts." "Well, if you're determined to go, you need to find Serpent. Around here, nobody knows every Melaleuca tree, every creek in that forest better than him. But he's a strange character, a gambling addict, drowning in debt. Be careful if you work with him, and make sure the payment is crystal clear." Quinn thanked Mr. Hale and followed his directions to Serpent's house. It was a dilapidated, crooked shack at the end of a small, muddy alley. A trellis of withered loofahs stood in the yard, a few dried-up gourds hanging limply. A skeletal black dog barked weakly at the stranger before curling back up in a corner. The man who opened the door had a gaunt, weather-beaten look, his skin tanned dark by the sun and wind. His salt and pepper hair was a tangled mess, and his patchy mustache was untrimmed. But what struck Quinn the most were his eyes. They were small and beady, constantly squinted, scanning Quinn from head to toe with a look that was probing, wary, and slightly contemptuous. This was Serpent. "You Serpent? Mr. Hale from the motel sent me," Quinn began politely. "I'm a researcher. I'd like to hire you as a guide into the forest, to find a place." "The abandoned shrine?" Serpent cut in, not waiting for Quinn to finish. His narrow eyes narrowed even further. "What do you want with that cursed place? Got too much money and looking for a place to die?" Quinn was slightly taken aback by his sharp reaction. "I'm a sound researcher. I've heard there are very unique sounds there at night." Serpent smirked, a less-than-friendly gesture that revealed teeth stained yellow from tobacco. "Unique? People call it the sound of wailing ghosts. Are you city boys so bored you have to go looking for this nonsense? Go back to Crestfall City and listen to club music, be civilized." Quinn realized beating around the bush with this man would get him nowhere. He got straight to the point, pulling out his wallet. "I'll pay you well," he said, his tone firm. $5,000 for 3 days. You just need to get me to the right place and ensure my safety on the way. I'll handle the rest." Serpent's eyes lit up at the sight of the green bills in Quinn's hand. 5,000. That was no small sum for him. It was enough to pay off the gambling debts he was being hounded for daily. The earlier wariness and insolence were quickly replaced by a fake affability. He ran a hand over his patchy mustache and cleared his throat. 5,000? All right then. There's no place in this forest I don't know. I even know where the old landlord buried his gold. But I'm warning you, kid, that shrine is a powerful place, not somewhere to mess around. None of the locals dare go near it. If you've got the guts, fine, but if something happens, I'm not responsible." "I understand," Quinn replied curtly. "Can we leave at 8 tomorrow morning?" "Okay," Serpent nodded repeatedly, his hand not forgetting to take the $2,000 advance Quinn offered. 8 tomorrow morning. I'll wait at the dock at the end of the market. Remember to bring water and snacks. Once you're in there, it's just leeches and mosquitoes, no convenience stores." As Quinn turned and left the muddy alley, he didn't see the greedy, calculating gaze Serpent fixed on his backpack, bulging with professional equipment. 5,000 was a lot of money, enough to solve his immediate problems. But in the man's cunning mind, another thought had just sparked, one far darker and more dangerous. A well-dressed city kid, loaded down with expensive-looking gear, foolishly searching for a shrine rumored to be haunted. And places like that, according to the old folks in the village, were often where the rich used to hide their gold and silver to keep it from bandits. This trip could be worth much more than $5,000. Much, much more. The next morning, Quinn was at the dock early. It was a small dirt landing where a few old longtail boats were moored, bobbing on the water. He checked his equipment one last time. The Zoom H6 recorder was his command center. A Rode NTG 4 Plus shotgun microphone for directional recording, able to isolate sounds from a distance. 2 tiny lavalier mics to be placed in hidden spots, discreetly capturing ambient sound. And most importantly, a device he had custom ordered from overseas, a geophone, capable of recording microvibrations from the ground. He wanted to capture the soul of this place from every angle, from the air to the earth. He wanted a perfect recording. As he was fumbling with a tangle of wires, a clear, energetic female voice from behind pulled him from his concentration. "Wow, what a setup! Are you a professional documentary filmmaker?" Quinn turned around. A young woman stood before him. She had a stylish pixie cut with a few chestnut brown streaks. She wore camouflage jeans and a sporty tank top, revealing fair skin and slender shoulders. A professional-looking Sony Alpha camera hung from her neck. But her most captivating features were a radiant smile and big, bright, intelligent eyes that shone with curiosity. "Hi. I'm Quinn, a sound researcher." Quinn introduced himself, a little flustered by her forwardness. "Oh, a sound researcher? That sounds so cool. I've never met anyone in that field before," the girl said, extending her hand, the smile still on her face. "I'm Annie. I'm a travel vlogger. I'm doing a series on exploring unique and unusual places in the Riverlands. Are you heading into the Blackwood Forest too?" "Yes, I am. I'm here to record some special sounds." "What a coincidence. I was planning to go there to shoot some video. I heard the water level is high this season, and the water ferns cover the surface in a beautiful green carpet. Hey, why don't we go together? It'll be more fun. Maybe I could interview you a bit about your interesting job. I'm sure my channel's audience would love it." Annie's suggestion was natural and well-intentioned. Quinn hesitated. He was used to working alone. Absolute silence and focus were crucial for him to perceive the most subtle sound frequencies. The presence of another person, especially a vlogger who constantly had to talk and film, could disrupt his workspace. But the girl's enthusiasm and positive energy made it hard to refuse. Besides, he thought, having a companion might be a good thing, at least to dilute the tense and suspicious atmosphere between him and his guide, Serpent. "All right," he nodded slightly. Just then, Serpent pulled up to the dock in a long-tail skiff, a type of small, long boat characteristic of the region. The engine chugged, spewing smoke. Seeing Quinn talking to a pretty, energetic girl, he squinted and grinned suggestively. "You work fast, kid. Barely a day in this godforsaken place and you've already got a girl with you. This is Annie. She wants to go into the forest too and will be joining us," Quinn explained briefly, deliberately ignoring Serpent's crude joke. Serpent glanced at Annie, his eyes lingering for a second on the expensive camera around her neck, then back at Quinn's gear. In his eyes, the value of this trip had just multiplied. This was no longer a simple guiding job. This was a mobile gold mine. "More people means more money," he muttered under his breath, then grinned broadly, the calculation clear in his eyes. "All right, the more the merrier. Hop on, you two." The skiff cut through the water, gliding across the vast Grand Canal, the border waterway connecting Port Croft and Harrow's End. After a while, Serpent steered the boat into a smaller, narrower creek, overgrown with trees on both banks. This creek was the gateway into the heart of the Blackwood Melaleuca Forest. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere changed. The houses along the canal grew sparse and then disappeared entirely, replaced by an endless sea of green from the Melaleuca trees and water ferns. A lush green carpet of water hyacinth covered the surface, so thick that the water below was invisible. The skiff left a long wake behind it, like a slash across a giant green silk cloth, a wake that was quickly closed by the shifting ferns. The space grew so quiet that even the normally talkative Annie lowered her voice when speaking to Quinn, as if afraid to disturb the ancient, centuries-old piece of the place. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, raising her camera to pan across the magnificent scene. "It feels like we've entered another world, another era." Quinn didn't answer. He had put on his headphones, his eyes half closed, completely immersed in the world of sound around him. He didn't want to miss a thing. He could hear the gentle, rhythmic splash of Serpent's oar. He heard the faint swish of a large fish flicking its tail beneath the thick layer of ferns. He heard the lonely, plaintive call of a cuckoo from a distant thicket. And he heard the silence itself. A heavy silence, full of depth, a living silence, not an empty one. It was unlike the silence of any other place he had ever been. Seated at the bow, Serpent observed the reactions of his two city clients. One had his eyes closed as if meditating, while the other's eyes were wide as she snapped photos constantly. He cleared his throat, deciding it was time to add a little spice to the trip. "This forest looks peaceful, but it's a fierce place, you too. Back when I was a ranger, I saw all sorts of things on my night patrols. Sometimes, you'd be walking and hear a baby crying right from the water. You'd look down, and there's nothing there. Other times, you'd see a white figure gliding across the treetops. The folks around here are very superstitious. They don't even dare go deep during the day, let alone at night." Annie looked thrilled, true to her vlogger's instinct for strange stories. "Really? Tell us more. What about the shrine Quinn is looking for? Does it have a special story?" Ty took a long drag from a small bamboo pipe he carried, exhaling a thick cloud of white smoke. "Ah, the shrine of the Serpent's Creek Lady. That's a long story." He deliberately lowered his voice, creating a mysterious, ghostly atmosphere. "The story goes, a long, long time ago, there was a landlady in this area, rich as dirt but wicked as sin. Her husband was cheating on her and brought home a mistress. The wife flew into a jealous rage, had her men capture the mistress while she was pregnant, and drowned her right in this very creek. But that wasn't enough. After the mistress gave birth to a son, she had the baby captured and drowned too. One body, two lives. The vengeful spirits of the mother and child couldn't move on, they just lingered here, haunting and snatching people who passed by. The villagers got so scared they built the shrine to worship her, hoping to appease her anger. But that shrine wasn't for praying for blessings. It was built to trap her inside. Anyone who desecrates it, or accidentally takes something from inside, she'll follow them home, to the ends of the earth." "Wow, that sounds like something out of a horror movie," Annie laughed, but a flicker of fear and apprehension had entered her eyes. She quickly aimed her camera at Serpent, signaling for him to continue. This was exactly the kind of material she was looking for. Quinn remained silent, but he had, at some point, taken off his headphones. Serpent's story, though likely embellished to scare tourists, resonated strangely with the sound he'd heard in the professor's audio file. The wail of a drowned woman. The choked sob of an innocent child. They fit together with a chilling perfection. The skiff continued on. The creek narrowed, and the trees on either bank grew denser. Old, gnarled Melaleuca trunks, their bark peeling like snakeskin, stretched their skeletal branches over the water like bony, ghostly arms. The sunlight was almost completely blocked by the thick canopy, leaving only faint, dancing patches of light on the green water, creating a scene that was both beautiful and haunting. The air grew damp and cool, even though the sun was still blazing outside the forest. "We're almost there," Serpent said suddenly, his voice now lower, his boastful tone gone. "Just around that bend, you'll see the mound with the shrine. Prepare yourselves." As the boat slowly rounded the bend, a strange, surreal sight appeared before them. Amidst a sea of lush green foliage, a small mound of earth rose above the water. On that mound stood a solitary, ancient shrine, its Inyan roof tiles almost completely shattered, a sorrowful dark green moss covering it. The strangest thing was that around the shrine, in a radius of about 30 feet, not a single plant grew. There was only a patch of bare, grayish earth, as if the grass and trees had been scorched by some invisible force, or had their life force drained away. The ancient Melaleuca trees surrounding the mound didn't stretch their branches toward the shrine as they normally would. Instead, they seemed to curve away, as if they were afraid, trying to flee from whatever reigned on that patch of land. A sudden silence fell. The chirping of insects from moments before abruptly ceased. Even the rustling of the wind was gone. An absolute, oppressive silence, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. A silence so heavy you could hear your own heart beating in your chest. Serpent quickly cut the engine. The skiff drifted sluggishly, without a single ripple, in the thick, moss-green water. He swallowed hard, a sound loud in the quiet, his face, usually tanned and weathered, now visibly pale. "We're here," he whispered, his voice hoarse and strained. "The shrine of the Serpent's Creek Lady." Quinn slowly stood up in the boat, his eyes fixed on the ancient shrine. He didn't feel fear like Annie or Serpent. Instead, it was a trembling excitement, the feeling of an explorer about to discover a new land. He knew he had found it. The source of the sound that had haunted him for days. It was right there, before him, silent and deadly, waiting. The atmosphere was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Annie shivered involuntarily, rubbing her bare arms. The chill didn't come from the temperature, it seeped from somewhere in the space around them, penetrating her skin and chilling her to the bone. She lowered her camera, the initial vlogger's curiosity and excitement gone, replaced by a growing apprehension, a bad feeling coiling in her gut. Why is it so quiet here?" she whispered, her voice strained, just loud enough for Quinn to hear. Serpent didn't answer. He was muttering some prayer under his breath, the words indistinct. His eyes darted around, refusing to look directly at the shrine, filled with fear. The seasoned boatman, the one who claimed to know every tree and creek in this forest, now looked more timid than a child. Quinn was the only one who appeared calm, but a closer look would reveal his knuckles were white as he gripped his audio recorder. His calmness was that of a soldier before battle, a state of intense focus to suppress fear. "Serpent, you stay here and watch the boat. Annie and I will go check it out," Quinn said, his voice decisive and clear. He didn't want Serpent's fear to affect him, and more importantly, he needed someone to guard their only means of escape from this cursed place. Serpent nodded eagerly, as if he'd been granted a pardon. Yeah, you go. Be careful. Don't touch anything in there." Quinn and Annie sloshed through the shallow, frigid water toward the mound. The mud beneath their feet was smooth and cold. As their feet touched the dry earth of the mound, a strange sensation ran up their spines. The ground here was as hard and cold as stone, even though sunlight was filtering down from the canopy above. Annie curiously bent down and picked up a small pebble. It was as cold as if it had been stored in a freezer. She quickly threw it away. The shrine appeared before them, even more dilapidated and sorrowful up close. The brick walls were stained and moldy, revealing the gray mortar within. The wooden door had rotted away, clinging to the frame by a single, rusty hinge. Inside, it was dark and damp. The old scent of incense was gone, replaced by the smell of mold, damp earth, and neglect, creating the unique odor of a place long abandoned. In front of the shrine was a large, crude stone incense burner. It was filled with ash that had turned to soil and a few rotten incense sticks. Quinn noticed the carvings on its side. They weren't the dragons, phoenixes, or flowers he usually saw at temples and shrines. Instead, they depicted human figures with faces contorted in agony, being dragged down by vicious waves. Images of violence and despair. Creepy, Annie muttered. Who would carve something like this on a place of worship? It looks like a scene from hell. Quinn said nothing. He slipped past the creaking door, careful not to make it collapse. He stepped into the darkness. Annie took a deep breath for courage, turned on her phone's flashlight, and timidly followed him. The inside of the shrine was smaller than they expected. Just a square room, about 100 square feet. Light filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating a floor covered in dry leaves, dust, and cobwebs. In the center of the room was an old concrete altar. There were no statues of Buddhas or gods on it. There was only a wooden funerary tablet, its inscriptions faded, set in another stone incense burner with the same pattern as the one outside. What caught Quinn's attention and sent a chill down his spine were the countless scratch marks covering the surface of the altar and the surrounding walls. Deep scratches, gouged into the plaster, as if a trapped wild animal had clawed frantically in a desperate attempt to escape. "There's nothing here," Annie said, her voice a mix of disappointment and relief. "It's probably just local rumors. A normal abandoned shrine." Quinn shook his head. He brought a finger to his lips, signaling for her to be quiet. He was listening. He closed his eyes, shutting out all visual information, focusing only on his hearing. In the near-absolute silence of the shrine, he began to hear other sounds, sounds that a normal person would miss. The soft, rasping sound of termites eating away at the wooden pillars from within. The steady drip, drip, drip of water from the roof into a small, stagnant puddle in a dark corner. And a very faint hum. An extremely low frequency, almost below the threshold of human hearing, but it created an invisible pressure on his eardrums, causing a slight ringing and a sense of nausea. A type of infrasound. "Do you hear that?" Quinn asked quietly, his eyes still closed. Annie strained her ears, trying to focus. "I don't hear anything but a buzzing in my ears. It's probably because the air is so stuffy in here." "No, it's not that," Quinn affirmed, opening his eyes. "It's here. This is it." He began his work, quickly and professionally. He placed the main H6 recorder on the altar, aiming the microphones toward the door to capture the overall soundscape. Then, he took out the two small lavalier mics. He discreetly tucked one into a crack in the wall and cleverly hid the other behind the wooden tablet. Finally, he brought out his most important piece of equipment, the geophone. He placed it on the floor in the very center of the shrine and connected its cable to a separate recording channel on his Zoom H6. "What's that for?" Annie asked curiously, looking at the strange, heavy, circular device. "It records vibrations from the ground," Quinn explained briefly. "Sometimes, sounds we can't hear with our ears can be perceived through physical vibrations. Or things that are deep underground." While Quinn was setting up his recording system, Annie got to work as well. She switched her Sony Alpha to video mode and panned her camera across every corner of the shrine, from the chilling scratch marks on the walls to the bizarrely carved incense burner. She tried to keep her voice calm and professional, as if reviewing a haunted tourist spot, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the fear that was creeping up inside her. As she panned toward the dark corner with the stagnant puddle Quinn had noticed, she suddenly froze. Through the camera's LCD screen, she saw something reflected in the water. It wasn't the reflection of the roof or of herself. It was the image of a face. A woman's face with disheveled hair, deathly pale skin, and empty, black eyes staring directly into the lens. Annie let out a blood-curdling scream that ripped through the shrine's silence. She stumbled backward reflexively, tripping over her own feet and falling hard onto the dusty floor. The camera flew from her hands, landing with a thud. "What's wrong?" Quinn spun around, startled. In the water." Annie stammered, her face white as a sheet, her trembling finger pointing toward the dark corner. Quinn rushed over, shining his phone's flashlight into the puddle. It was just a small, stagnant pool of water, reflecting his flashlight beam and a patch of the broken roof above. There was no face. Nothing at all. "You must have seen things," Quinn said, trying to reassure her and himself. "The light in here is tricky, it's easy to see illusions." Annie shook her head violently, her face drained of all color. "No. I saw it clearly. A face, a woman." Just then, an icy wind blasted into the shrine from nowhere, though outside the sky was clear and there wasn't a breeze. The wind carried the foul stench of mud and a nauseating odor of death. The rickety wooden door slammed shut with a deafening, final. Both of them jumped. And then, it began. From the monitoring headphones Quinn was still wearing, a sound began to emerge. At first, it was just a low static, like radio interference. But it grew rapidly, transforming into a high-pitched, piercing shriek, like the sound of 10 people simultaneously scratching their nails on a blackboard. Quinn quickly raised his hand to lower the volume but was too late. The sound was like an invisible drill, boring straight into his brain, making him dizzy and disoriented. But that wasn't all. Mixed with that maddening shriek was a voice. A woman's whisper, mournful and full of rage, repeating a single, unclear phrase over and over. The language wasn't Vietnamese, nor any language Quinn knew. It was ancient, like a moan, a curse. But then, amid the ancient words, he heard it. Clearly. 3 simple English words, echoing as if from hell itself. "Give me back my son." "Annie, do you hear that?" Quinn shouted, trying to be heard over the horrific screeching in his ears. Annie was clutching her head, her face contorted in pain. "I don't hear anything. I just see. Her eyes were wide, staring at an empty space in front of her, near the altar. So many hands, scratching the walls. At the same time, Quinn glanced at his recorder. The level meter for the geophone channel was spiking wildly, signaling an extremely powerful vibration from beneath the ground. The vibrations grew more frantic, as if something enormous was stirring, trying to push its way up from under the shrine's floor. A large brick fell from the ceiling, shattering right next to Annie's feet. Dust filled the air. "Let's go!" Quinn yelled, his survival instincts taking over. He snatched the Zoom H6 recorder, leaving all the microphones behind, grabbed Annie's hand as she stood in a daze, and pulled her into a desperate run out of the shrine. They burst out into the light, not daring to look back. The cold wind chased them, carrying the mournful whisper and a wild, terrifying laugh. "Ah ha ha." They ran straight down the mound, splashing through the water, and scrambled toward the moored skiff. Seeing them running out in a panic, their faces pale, Snake Tie was just as terrified. He hurriedly started the engine without a word. The skiff roared to life, turned, and shot off like an arrow, leaving the eerily silent shrine and the barren patch of land behind. When the boat had left the small creek and returned to the main canal, the sound of insects began to chirp again. The sunlight seemed warmer, no longer gloomy and sinister. Only then did Annie seem to recover. She collapsed onto the floor of the boat, sobbing uncontrollably, her body trembling with fear. Quinn sat beside her, awkwardly putting an arm around her shoulder to comfort her, but his own hand was shaking uncontrollably. Serpent glanced at them from the corner of his eye, then looked back at the distant forest. "I told you so," he muttered, his voice still trembling. "You didn't listen. You can't go in there and expect to come out fine. The lady has cursed you." That evening at the motel, no one spoke. Dinner was skipped. Annie locked her door and refused to come out. Quinn knew she was in shock. So was he. He sat alone in his simple room, facing the audio recorder on the table. It lay there, silent, but he knew it held a terrible secret. His heart pounded as he plugged in his headphones, preparing to listen to what had happened. He had to confirm it. He had to know it wasn't an illusion. He took a deep breath and pressed play. The beginning was normal, the sound of their footsteps on dry leaves, their quiet conversation, the gentle wind. Then came Annie's scream. Quinn fast-forwarded past that. He stopped at the exact moment the cold wind blew in. And he heard it. Clearer than when he was there. The piercing shriek. The furious, whispered curse in an ancient tongue. And the phrase "Give me back my son," as clear as day. But what made Quinn's blood run cold, what made his skin crawl, wasn't what he had heard. It was what he hadn't heard on the other channels. He checked each audio track individually. On the track from Annie's mic, there was only her scream and the whistling wind. On the track from the main directional mic on the altar, there was the shriek and the wind, but absolutely no whispered voice. Same for the mic hidden in the wall. Only on the channel from the tiny lavalier microphone he had hidden behind the wooden tablet, did the voice appear. Clear, cold, and terrifyingly close, as if the speaker had been whispering directly into it. The entity had deliberately spoken into that specific microphone. And the most terrifying part was the track from the geophone. It hadn't just recorded vibrations. It had recorded sound. A rhythmic, thumping sound, growing faster and louder, perfectly synchronized with the moment the entire shrine shook. It was the sound of a heart. A giant heart, beating with a furious, insane rhythm, right beneath the floor of the shrine. Quinn ripped the headphones off, gasping for breath. His heart felt like it was about to burst from his chest. This wasn't an illusion. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. Something truly existed at that shrine. A conscious entity, capable of selective communication, and it was very, very angry. He looked at the recorder on the table. It was no longer just a scientific instrument. It had become evidence. Proof of the existence of a world his rational mind had never believed in. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "Quinn, you in there?" It was Serpent's voice, sounding urgent. Quinn hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Serpent stood there, his expression completely different from the morning. The fear and blatant greed were gone. In their place was an unusual seriousness, mixed with a hint of calculation. "You heard something, didn't you?" Serpent asked directly, his eyes fixed on the recorder on Quinn's table. Quinn didn't answer, just gave a slight nod. Serpent glanced up and down the hallway before slipping into the room and shutting the door. "I knew you weren't an ordinary guy. That gear of yours isn't for play. Do you have the guts to go back there one more time?" For what? Quinn asked warily. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Serpent lowered his voice to a whisper. To talk to her. You have the equipment, you can hear what she says. I have something I want to ask her. A long time ago, before my father died, he told me that my grandfather was a tenant farmer for that landlord. He hid a little gold in that shrine to keep it from bandits. But no one ever dared go back for it, they were too scared. If you help me ask where the gold is hidden, I'll give you half. Think of it as compensation for today's scare. Quinn stared at Serpent, his astonishment quickly turning to contempt. He understood now. This man's fear had been completely eclipsed by his bottomless greed. He believed Quinn could communicate with the entity in the shrine and wanted to exploit it to find treasure.